Hello guys, welcome to a tutorial on using the Firebase Realtime Database with Unity. In this tutorial, we are going to be going over how to save and load user data using Firebase. We will go over setting up the real-time database in the Firebase console, then how to save some simple user data from your Unity project to the database, and then how to load that data from the database and display it on a scoreboard. This tutorial builds off of the previous tutorial about Firebase authentication. Before continuing with this tutorial, I suggest watching the previous video so that you're at the same stage. You can find the link in the description. Okay, let's get started. The first thing that you need to do, if you don't already have a Unity project that you are integrating this into, is download the starter project I made from GitHub. It is essentially the completed project from the last tutorial, but there are some new UI elements for things we are going to be adding today. Link is in the description. If you don't want to use the starter project, that's fine as well. You can create your own or use an existing project. I do suggest using my starter project though, as it is the easiest way to follow along with the tutorial. Now that you have the starter project, we are going to go to the Firebase console. Once we're there, on the left side we're going to navigate to the Real-Time Database tab. And then here we're going to click Create Database. It's going to prompt you with wanting to create it in locked mode or test mode. We're going to be doing it in lock mode to start. So just click Enable. And it's going to load into our main data tree here, which is currently empty. Okay, now let's look at the options we have here. In the top left, we have these 4 tabs here. Data, which is the one that we're in. The rules here, which shows all the rules for our database, which we're going to get into in a minute. Then we have backups, which isn't available unless you have the Blaze plan. Okay. And then you have the usage, which shows you how much data is being sent and received. So let's go back to the rules tab here, and we're going to actually set these both to true. So we have read true and write true. Now because we selected the lock mode when we created the database, by default it set them to false, so it's completely private and nobody can read and write. But now we've made it completely public because we set them both to true. Now when we publish this, it's going to give us a warning here saying that this is public and are you sure you want to do this, because anybody can read and write to this database. Now this is okay because we're going to be coming back to this later and fixing it, so just dismiss that for now. There is one more thing we need from the Firebase console if you don't already have it downloaded. We go to the gear icon here and go to project settings, scroll down. We're going to need to get our Google services.json file. So we're just going to download that for later. And that's all we have to do in the console for now, so let's head back to Unity. Okay, so now that we're back in Unity, the first thing that we need to do is import the Firebase Realtime Database package. Now in the previous tutorial I showed how to do it by going to Assets, Import Package, Custom Package, and then you would select the correct package that we downloaded from the Firebase website. But we're not going to do it that way anymore because that's the old way, and that's not how we're meant to do it in Unity 2019 and Unity 2020. So the new way of doing it is by going to Window, Package Manager, and it should open the Package Manager window here. And if we make sure that we're in the right packages filter here, the in project, okay, it should show these 3 packages already installed if you're using the starter project under Google LLC, or if you properly installed the packages last episode. Okay, so I went ahead and uninstalled all the Firebase packages just so we can start from scratch and make sure that if you're using your own project, you can figure this out too. So we're going to go to this gear here and click on Advanced Project Settings, which is where you can get access to the scoped registries. So this is the Google registry here, and it's already here, but you're going to have to go ahead and add it if it's not there. You can give it whatever name. This name works. You're going to need to make sure you have the same URLs here and scope right here, and then you're just going to have to click apply. And then if we close this, it should show up in the package manager. If we change the filter to my registries, you should see here the Google LLC registry, and these are all the packages that Google offers for Unity. So the first thing we're going to need to do is install the Firebase App Core package. Okay, and you should see it automatically installed the external dependency manager. The next one we need is the Firebase authentication. We're going to reinstall that. Okay, and the last one we need is the Firebase Realtime Database, and we're going to install that as well. Okay, and now to make sure they're in here, if we change the filter back to in project, it should show all these 4 packages here under Google LLC, and these are the 4 that we need. Okay, now if you're using 2019 instead of Unity 2020, this option here for advanced project settings and adding the Google LLC registry is not there yet. So in 2019, you have to actually go and manually add it in the manifest.json file, which can be found in your project folder, and then the packages folder and the manifest.json. And right at the bottom here, you're going to have to add this part here that I've highlighted. It's basically the same thing, just you have to add it in this file instead. And what this will do is just basically add what we did already, which is add the Google LLC registry to the My Registries. Now you should hopefully have all these Firebase packages installed correctly now, and we are ready to move on. Okay, now we're going to go get that Google services.json file we downloaded, or you may already have it in your project if you're continuing on from last time. So we're going to grab it here and we're going to drag it into our streaming assets folder here. If you don't have this folder, then just make one. And you can see here now it's in our project. This Google services.json file is what links your Unity project to your Firebase console project. So you need to make sure that you have your own unique Google services.json file in your project. Okay, so we're going to start by doing a few cleanup tasks here. So now that we're using Firebase authentication and the Firebase database, we're no longer going to call this the auth manager here. We're going to call it the Firebase manager. So let's rename it to Firebase. There we go. And then also on this Firebase manager, we have the auth manager script, which we should now rename. If we go to the scripts folder here, instead of auth manager, let's rename it also to Firebase manager. There we go. And now let's open it up. And once Visual Studio opens here, we have to also change the class name here from auth manager to Firebase manager, and make sure to save it. So back in Unity here, let's actually click play and see what we left off with from the last tutorial. So let's start by logging in here. Okay, so let's click login. Right now it just shows this logged in text. But what we want it to actually do here, if we end the game and go under our canvas here, and what we want it to do is disable this login UI and enable this user data UI. And then we'll actually be interacting with these boxes to change user data. Okay, so back in our Firebase manager script here, let's scroll down and find our login IEnumerator method here. And then at the bottom here, where we're right now setting the confirmation text to say logged in, I'm just going to copy from my reference script here in some code, which is basically going to wait for 2 seconds, and then it's going to call this method in the UI manager to change to the user data UI, and then it's just going to set the confirmation text to blank. So I'll pause here and copy this code. Now if you remember from last episode, this UI manager script, it comes with the starter project, which basically handles changing between the different screens. So you're either going to have to use this one, or if you're in your own project, you're going to have to make your own system to change between screens. Okay, now back in Unity, let's log in. And it shows a login text, and then 2 seconds later it switches to the user data screen. Perfect. So the next thing we're going to do is hook up this sign out button. Okay, so back in our Firebase manager script, first thing we're going to do is right at the top, we're going to type using firebase.database, so we have all our package reference in here. And then what we're going to do, I'm going to copy in from my reference script here all the variables that we're going to be using for these new database features. So yeah, username, XP, kills, etc. We'll get into how to implement these later, but for now just pause the video and copy these in. Okay, so now what we're going to do is, because we're going to be signing out, we're going to be going back to the login screen. So what we want to do here, if I copy these 2 methods from my reference script here, is we are going to want to clear the login fields and register fields when we go back to those screens. So basically what these 2 methods do here is they just set all the text boxes to blank. So go ahead and pause the video here and copy them down. Okay, so let's implement this sign out method here now. So right below the register button, let me copy from my script here, this sign out button method here. And what it does is it basically does auth.signout, which signs you out of the authentication. And then right after, it does the UI manager and it runs the login screen method, which brings us back to the login screen. And then it calls our two clear field methods that we just made. So go ahead and pause the video here and copy her down. Okay, back in Unity here, let's hook up that sign out button. So we go to our user data elements buttons and then our logout button here. And we're gonna have to drag in our Firebase manager script into here. And then we're gonna have to go to Firebase manager and find our sign out button method right there. And now the sign out button's hooked up. Now if we click play and log in, okay, now if we click the sign out button, it'll bring it back to the login screen and the input fields are empty. Perfect. Right, now if we go and turn off our login UI and turn on our user data UI here, just so we can see, you can see that these are our 4 user data that we're going to be storing here: username, experience, kills, and deaths. So now let's go and hook these up. Back in our Firebase manager script here, we're going to go right to the top and we're going to make another variable here, the database reference variable here, call it db reference. And then we're going to go down to our Firebase, initialize Firebase method here, and let me copy it in here. This is where we're going to initialize it to the Firebase database default instance root reference. Okay, so copy this. And now let's go right to the bottom here and we're going to get a bunch of methods here. So let's start with the update username methods here. Now you notice there's actually 2 of them. So the first one here is for the update username auth. So for the authentication, there is a username linked with the user profile. So this first one basically does the update profile async, passing the profile which has the username in it. Okay. So, and then now the second one down here, the update username database one, is for a username that we're going to be storing in the database for the scoreboard. So if you see right here, this db task, this is the main line right here that updates the database. So we go to our db reference, and then a child of that will be a users list. And then the child of that will be our user.userid. And then the child of that will be the username. And then we're going to set that value to the username that we pass to the method. And then it waits for the task to be completed. And then down here, it just handles if there's any errors. And otherwise, the username is now updated. And that right there is how you update data in the database. Now let's scroll up. And let's copy in for my reference the save data button method. And this method basically is going to call all the update enumerator methods. So you can see here it's starting the coroutine for the update username auth, update username database, passing in the username field.text. So that's what's in the username field. Okay. And then the other 3 here right now have errors because we haven't made them yet. So let's go make them. Scroll down. Let's let me copy these in from my reference. Here they all are. Now we have the update XP enumerator, update kills, and update deaths. And these basically do the same thing it did with the username. It goes to the database reference, users, user ID. Instead of username, it just goes to death, kills, or XP. Okay. So now you can go ahead and copy all these in. Scrolling back up here, you should see it now. All the errors are gone because they exist now. So there's one more thing that we should do here before we test it, and that's in our login method here. So since we already know the username from when we register the user, when we log in, we want to set the username field in the data screen to the user.displayname. And the other thing we want to do is we might as well clear the fields here. And then if we scroll down to the register, let's also clear the fields here. Okay, let's go test it. Okay, so now let's wire up this save button under the user data elements buttons save button here. Let's, in the on click here, drag in the Firebase manager object, and then find the function for the save data button. Okay, now let's also on the Firebase Manager, remember we added all those variables, so let's drag in all the references to these variables. So under the elements here, let's open all these up. We need the username input, the XP input, kills input, and the deaths input. Now for the score element, you're gonna have to go to this prefabs folder that came with the starter project, and this is the score element prefab. So we're gonna drag that in there. We'll get more into what that is in a bit. And then the same thing, we're gonna have to go to our scoreboard UI, go down into the elements, scroll view, viewport, content. This is where the content's gonna go for our score elements, which again we'll get into when we hook up the scoreboard. Okay? Let's go ahead and play now. Log in quickly. And you can see here that Zippy is the username and it populated the field. That's perfect. Now let's go ahead and fill out these other fields with some data here. So let's give 1 for experience, 10 for kills, and 7 for deaths. And then let's click this save button. Okay, now if we look in the Firebase Console Realtime Database in the data tab here, you can see that there's actually data here now. That save button sent the data to the database, and here it is. So there you can see the users and then my UID for Zippy, and then you can see the deaths, kills, the username, and the XP. So yeah, we have data here now. Perfect. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is we want to actually reload the data from the database if there already is some and populate those fields. So let me copy it in here. Here we go, load user data. So right here, here's the task. It's going to go to the DB reference under the child users, and then it's going to go under the child our user ID, and then it's going to get the value async. So it's going to get all the data from there. If there's any errors, if the data is null, so if there is no data yet, we haven't sent it before, we're just going to set all the fields to 0 because no data exists. Okay, and then otherwise, if there's data, it's going to create a snapshot of the task result, and then it's going to set the XP field, kills field, death field to the snapshot of the XP value, kills, and deaths. So go ahead and copy this down. Okay, now let's scroll up to the login method. Here is the login method, and let's go down to the else, and right after we set the text to say logged in, we're now going to call the load user data start coroutine. So this is going to load the user data right before we wait 2 seconds and then go to the user data screen. So yeah, I think that's good. Let's go test it. Okay, so now let's play again, and this time log in with our test account here. Log in. See, this is the tester username, and you can see that all the inputs here populated with 0 because we have no data for the tester account yet. So let's go ahead and fill in some data now. Okay, and let's click save here. And then if we go look in the Firebase console now in the database, you can see there's another UID, which is for the tester account. And there's the deaths, kills, and XP here now. So now, back in Unity, let's sign out of the tester account and sign back into my Zippy account. And as you can see now, this is the Zippy data populating instead of the tester. So next, let's hook up the scoreboard. So back in the Firebase Manager, right at the bottom here, we're going to bring in one last big method, the load scoreboard data method here. Now this is going to do a DB task. It's going to go to the DB reference, child, the users list, and then it's going to order all the data by the child of kills so that the user with the most kills will show up first. So it's going to get that value. It's going to wait for the task to be completed. Any errors will be handled here. Then it's going to set snapshot to the dbtask.result, so all the data we just got. Then it's going to loop through all the childs in our scoreboard content transform and just destroy them all because we're going to remake all of the score elements. In this next for each loop here, it's going to loop through all the user datas in the snapshot, so the children. And it's actually going to reverse it because it actually comes in as the least kills showing first, but we want the most kills to show first. So here actually it's red here, so let's show potential issues, and it shows here that we need to import this using here, so it's apply. And if you scroll right to the top, you see it just brought in the system.linq, so copy that in. Okay, so if we scroll right back down here, you can see the error's gone. So this for each loop loops through all the users in the users list in the database, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to go through each user, get the username from the child snapshot username, same thing with the kills, the deaths, and the XP. And then what we're going to do is we're going to instantiate a new scoreboard element here, the instantiate score element, which is the prefab, and then we're going to put it under the scoreboard content transform. Then we're going to go to the score element and get the component score element, and we're going to call the method new score element, passing the username, kills, deaths, and XP. And if we actually go to the score element script here, you can see that this came with the starter project. It just holds all the texts for the score element, and this method right here, new score element, sets all the text to the pass username, kills, deaths, and XP. Okay. And then the very last thing that we need to do is we just need to go to the UI Manager instance and load the scoreboard screen. Okay, now let's scroll up, and right below the save button method here, let's put in one last method here for the scoreboard button. And what this does is it just starts the coroutine for the method we just made, load scoreboard data. And that's it. Copy this in and we're good to go. Back in Unity now, we just have to set up the two buttons on the scoreboard scene here. So let's go to the scoreboard button in the user data screen, and the on click, let's drag in the Firebase Manager, find the scoreboard button method. There we go. Now there's a login button on the user data UI, but there's also one in the scoreboard UI we haven't hooked up yet. So under buttons, the logout button here, we just also have to drag in the Firebase Manager to this on click and find the sign out button method here to hook up that button. Okay, so back in the Firebase console here, let's go to the rules tab here. And if you remember at the very beginning of the tutorial, we set both of these rules to true, which sets the database to completely public, which we said was a bad idea because anybody can read and write. So we're actually going to copy in proper rules here for our database setup. So what this does is underneath the users, you can only read if you're authenticated. So your auth is not equal to null. So if you're logged in, you're allowed to read underneath users. And then underneath a certain user ID, you can only write to that data if that user ID matches your current auth.uid, so the user ID you're currently logged in with. So there's this cool thing here also called the rules playground, which you can kind of test these rules with. So if we just set it to read here and unauthenticate me and run it, you can see that it says that I'm denied because I'm not authenticated. But if I do authenticate myself and make sure that my user ID is one of the user IDs here, so let's grab the tester user ID here, put it in that user ID field, and then make sure we're reading and that we're actually going to that, just to the users, and run. You can see it allows me because I have a user ID that is authenticated. Now let's try an update here. Let's make sure that the write works properly, and it doesn't work. Let's see why here. Oh, it's because I'm not actually going to a user ID under the users. So let's put in the tester user ID, and now it lets me write. Now let's maybe instead get the zippy user ID here and try and access Zippy's data, but with the tester UID trying to do it, and you see it doesn't allow me because the UID doesn't match. So now let's copy this one and make sure we put it in the UID, and now it allows me because the user IDs match. So this whole rule stuff can be confusing, but I highly suggest you go read the docs if you're going to be making a proper database, because this stuff's important to make sure that your data stays secure. So now let's test the final product here. So click play and let's log in with my Zippy account quickly. Okay, all our data is here. Now let's click on the scoreboard button. Brings us to the scoreboard screen, and there you go. It shows our two users, the Zippy and the tester user, and it shows Zippy first because he has more kills. Now let's go ahead and go back and let's actually change Zippy's kills to 0 here, and then save that data and go back to the scoreboard. And now you can see that tester's first because he has 5 kills, which is more than 0 kills, which Zippy has. Awesome. So I know this was a really long tutorial, but there was a lot of stuff to cover. If you need help, join the Discord server. I'll try to help you as much as I can there. Other than that, I think that's it for this tutorial. Thanks for watching.